The year was 1817, and London's Mayfair district gleamed like a jewel under the autumn sun, its Georgian mansions standing as monuments to wealth and propriety. Within these marble halls, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across polished floors, the ton gathered for their elaborate social rituals. Every drawing room whispered with secrets, every tea service carried more than just Earl Grey, it carried the currency of reputation. Lady Vesper Ashworth moved through this world like a phantom in silk, her emerald eyes observing everything while revealing nothing. At 24, she possessed the rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made her both coveted and feared among London's elite. Her raven-black hair was always perfectly arranged in the latest Grecian style, adorned with pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, the formidable Duchess of Marlborough. Her gowns, crafted by the finest modistes on Bond Street, were studies in elegant restraint, never too bold, never too plain, always perfectly calculated to command attention while maintaining the illusion of effortless grace. The Ashworth mansion on Berkeley Square was a testament to old money and older secrets. Its honey-colored Bath stone facade concealed interiors that spoke of generations of accumulated power. The morning room, where Lady Vesper held court over her correspondence, overlooked manicured gardens where topiary peacocks stood sentinel among beds of late-blooming roses. French doors opened onto a terrace where she often took her morning chocolate, observing the comings and goings of her neighbors with the acute attention of a natural spy. On this particular October morning, as golden leaves drifted past her window like nature's own calling cards, Lady Vesper sat at her mahogany escritoire, her delicate fingers holding a piece of cream vellum that bore no signature, only words that could destroy lives. The anonymous letter before her detailed the secret gambling debts of Lord Pemberton, debts that would scandalize society and ruin his engagement to the innocent Miss Charlotte Fairfax. "My lady," whispered her lady's maid, Agnes, a sharp-featured woman whose loyalty had been earned through years of shared secrets. "The morning post has arrived." Agnes's eyes darted nervously to the letter in her mistress's hands, recognizing the telltale cream paper that had become the stuff of legend throughout Mayfair. These mysterious missives appeared with clockwork precision, always revealing just enough truth to set tongues wagging and reputations trembling. Lady Vesper smiled, an expression both beautiful and terrible. "How fascinating that someone in our midst possesses such intimate knowledge of society's private affairs." Her voice carried the cultured tones of her education at Miss Pritchard's Seminary for Young Ladies, where she had excelled not only in watercolors and French but in the more subtle arts of observation and manipulation. The morning room's atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken implications. Outside, carriages rolled past bearing their occupants to morning calls and shopping expeditions, their occupants blissfully unaware that their secrets might already be committed to paper in elegant script. The very walls of the mansion seemed to pulse with the weight of accumulated knowledge, every dinner-party conversation overheard, every private letter glimpsed, every whispered confession collected like pressed flowers in an album of human folly. Lady Vesper's morning ritual of reading correspondence was as precise as it was deadly. She would arrange the letters by importance, family business first, then social invitations, then the anonymous revelations that had made her the most feared woman in London. Her writing desk, inherited from her great-aunt who had been a confidant to Queen Charlotte herself, contained secret compartments where she stored the most explosive intelligence. Each drawer was locked with a different key, and each key told a story of someone's downfall. The servants moved through the mansion like ghosts, trained to see nothing and remember less. Lady Vesper had inherited not just the Ashworth fortune but the Ashworth methodology, a system of information gathering that stretched back generations. Her grandfather had been a spymaster during the Napoleonic Wars, her grandmother a salon hostess whose tea parties had toppled ministers. The blood of influence flowed through her veins like liquid ambition. As the morning light strengthened, casting longer shadows across the Persian carpets, Lady Vesper rose from her desk with fluid grace. Her silk morning dress, a subtle shade of lavender that complemented her pale complexion, rustled softly as she moved to the window. From this vantage point, she could see across the square to Lady Pemberton's mansion, where no doubt the poor woman was planning her son's wedding, unaware that his financial ruin was already sealed. The Tun's social season was in full swing, with its endless round of balls, soirees, and morning calls that formed the beating heart of aristocratic life. Lady Vesper attended them all, not as a participant but as a student of human nature. She had learned that people revealed their deepest truths not in their grand gestures but in their smallest habits, the way Lord Whitmore's hand trembled when he picked up dice, the manner in which Lady Hartwell's eyes followed her husband's secretary, the nervous laugh that escaped Miss Prudence Weatherby whenever someone mentioned marriage. Her own reputation was as carefully crafted as her appearance. She was known as a devoted daughter who had nursed her ailing mother through her final illness, a patron of charitable causes who sponsored education for worthy young women, and a hostess whose dinner parties were legendary for their elegance and discourse. No one suspected that beneath this perfect exterior lurked the mind of London's most dangerous woman. The mysterious letters had begun appearing 6 months earlier, always delivered by unknown means, always containing information so accurate and devastating that even the most skeptical members of society had to acknowledge their author's extraordinary reach. Some blamed displaced French émigrés seeking revenge, others suspected a disgraced member of the Tun turned blackmailer. A few whispered that it might be a woman. After all, who else would have such intimate access to the private spaces where secrets were born? Lady Vesper moved through her morning with the precision of a master clock. She would breakfast lightly on chocolate and toast points, review the previous evening's intelligence with Agnes, and plan her strategy for the day's social encounters. Every conversation was a chess match, every smile a calculated move in a game whose stakes were nothing less than the destruction of lives. The Ashworth Library, where she spent her afternoons when not engaged in social warfare, contained more than just books. Behind false spines and hidden panels lay archives that chronicled the sins of 3 generations of London's elite. Her father had taught her that information was the ultimate currency, more valuable than gold because it could create gold, or destroy everything in its path. As the clock in the entrance hall chimed 10, Lady Vesper prepared to begin her daily performance. She would spend the morning in Hyde Park, ostensibly for healthful exercise but actually to observe and gather. The fashionable hour brought out society's finest, and Lady Vesper had learned that the most revealing conversations happened not in drawing rooms but during seemingly casual encounters along Rotten Row. Her carriage, an elegant barouche drawn by perfectly matched chestnuts, waited in the mews behind Berkeley Square. The coachman, Hobbs, was another of her inherited assets, a man whose past included services that went far beyond driving. As she settled into the butter-soft leather seats, Lady Vesper reflected on the delicious irony that the Tun's most proper lady was also its most dangerous predator. The morning air carried the scent of coal smoke and autumn leaves, mixing with the expensive perfumes of her fellow aristocrats as they began their daily migration through London's most fashionable districts. Each carriage that passed carried secrets, each well-dressed figure harbored vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Lady Vesper's trained eye catalogued them all, adding to her ever-growing collection of human weaknesses. Today would bring new revelations, new opportunities to demonstrate her power. The anonymous letters were more than mere gossip, they were instruments of control, ways to ensure that the natural order of society bent to her will. Those who pleased her found their secrets safe, those who crossed her discovered that privacy was an illusion and reputation a commodity that could be bought, sold, or destroyed with a few well-chosen words. As her carriage rolled through the gates of Hyde Park, Lady Vesper smiled behind her silk fan. The game was about to begin anew, and she held all the cards. The fashionable hour in Hyde Park transformed Rotten Row into a theatre of calculated display, where every gesture carried social significance and every conversation might determine a family's fate for generations. Lady Vesper's barouche joined the elegant parade of carriages, each vehicle a stage for its occupants to perform their carefully rehearsed roles in London's grand drama of manners and manipulation. Captain Harrison Blackwood of the 1st Dragoon Guards cut a striking figure on his magnificent black stallion, Perseus. At 31, he possessed the bearing of a soldier seasoned by Wellington's campaigns, his broad shoulders filling his scarlet uniform coat with natural authority. His dark hair, prematurely touched with silver at the temples, caught the autumn sunlight as he maneuvered his mount with the casual expertise of a cavalry officer. A scar across his left cheek, earned at Waterloo, only enhanced the dangerous appeal that had made him the object of countless feminine sighs. Lady Vesper observed him from beneath the shade of her parasol, noting the way other riders respectfully made way for his passage. Captain Blackwood was a fascinating anomaly in her world, a man whose honor appeared genuine in a society built on facades, whose fortune had been earned through merit rather than inherited through bloodline. His late father had been a country vicar, his rise through military ranks achieved through courage and intelligence rather than purchased commissions. Such integrity both intrigued and challenged her. "Lady Vesper," came a breathless voice as Miss Prudence Weatherby's carriage drew alongside. The young woman's round face was flushed with excitement beneath her chip-straw bonnet. "Have you heard the most shocking news about Lord Pemberton? They say his debts are so enormous that he may have to flee to the continent." Lady Vesper's expression remained serenely composed even as satisfaction coursed through her veins. The anonymous letter she had posted the previous evening had already begun its destructive work. "How distressing for poor Miss Fairfax," she murmured with perfect sympathy. "Such a devoted creature deserves better than financial scandal." Miss Weatherby leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Lady Pemberton is beside herself. They say she has taken to her bed with smelling salts. The wedding invitations have already been sent." As if summoned by their conversation, Lady Pemberton's carriage approached with funeral solemnity. The older woman's face was drawn and pale beneath her black velvet bonnet, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. Lady Vesper felt a moment's pang, not of guilt, for she had long ago discarded such inconvenient emotions, but of professional appreciation for the thoroughness of her work. Captain Blackwood's approach disrupted her contemplation. He touched his shako in greeting, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that few men dared display. "Lady Vesper. Might I have the honor of riding alongside your carriage for a moment?" There was something in his manner that suggested this was no casual social encounter. Lady Vesper indicated her consent with a graceful nod, dismissing Miss Weatherby with practiced diplomacy. As the young woman's carriage retreated, Captain Blackwood brought his horse closer to Lady Vesper's barouche, close enough that their conversation would remain private. "I find myself curious about these mysterious letters that have been causing such excitement in Mayfair," he said without preamble. His voice carried the crisp authority of command, but there was something else beneath, a challenge that made Lady Vesper's pulse quicken. "Indeed? I confess I know little beyond what one hears in drawing rooms," she replied, her tone perfectly modulated to suggest mild interest rather than the sharp attention she was actually paying to his every word and gesture. Captain Blackwood's smile was neither entirely friendly nor completely hostile. "How refreshing to meet someone so delightfully uninformed. In my experience, anonymous accusations usually originate from someone with intimate knowledge of society's private affairs. Someone who moves freely among all circles, whose presence is so accepted as to be invisible." The implication hung between them like smoke from cannon fire. Lady Vesper felt the familiar thrill of danger, the exquisite tension of being recognized by a worthy opponent. "How imaginative you are, Captain. Though I wonder what personal experience you might have with such matters." "My years in intelligence gathering for Wellington taught me to recognize patterns," he said, his grey eyes never leaving her face. "The letters demonstrate not only access to private information but a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. Their author knows precisely how much pressure to apply, which secrets will cause maximum damage, and how to remain safely invisible while orchestrating chaos." Lady Vesper's fan fluttered slightly, the only sign of her inner excitement. Here was a man who understood the game, who appreciated the skill required to play it at her level. "You credit this anonymous correspondent with considerable talent." "I credit them with genius," Captain Blackwood replied. "And I find myself hoping to make their acquaintance." The words carried layers of meaning that sent heat racing through Lady Vesper's carefully controlled facade. Was this a threat or an invitation? Did he seek to expose her or to understand her? The ambiguity was delicious. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Lord Pemberton himself, riding alone with the posture of a man facing execution. His usually impeccable appearance showed signs of strain, his cravat slightly askew, his face bearing the pallor of sleepless nights. He nodded stiffly to Captain Blackwood and Lady Vesper, clearly wishing to avoid conversation but trapped by social necessity. "Lord Pemberton," Lady Vesper said with gentle concern. "I hope we shall see you at Lady Morrison's soirée tomorrow evening. Such gatherings can be wonderfully restorative during trying times." The Baron's jaw tightened at her subtle reference to his troubles. "I fear my social calendar has become somewhat uncertain, Lady Vesper. Perhaps you understand better than most how quickly circumstances can change." The barb was delivered with enough politeness to maintain propriety, but its intent was clear. Lord Pemberton suspected her involvement in his downfall. Lady Vesper felt a thrill of professional pride. To be recognized by one's victims was the highest form of flattery. Captain Blackwood observed this exchange with the keen attention of a scout reading enemy positions. After Lord Pemberton rode away with wounded dignity, the captain turned back to Lady Vesper with renewed interest. "Fascinating how some people seem to attract suspicion," he mused. "Almost as if they invite such speculation through their very perfection." "I hardly consider myself perfect, Captain," Lady Vesper replied with a laugh like silver bells. "Though I do try to maintain certain standards." "Standards," he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I imagine you have very particular standards indeed. The question is whether they allow for collaboration." The word hung between them, loaded with possibility. Lady Vesper found herself genuinely intrigued by this soldier who seemed to understand both her methods and her motivations. In a world of predictable responses and transparent fears, Captain Blackwood represented something rare, an equal. Their silent communion was broken by the arrival of Lady Morrison's elaborate state coach, its ducal coronet glittering in the afternoon sun. The elderly dowager peered out with sharp eyes that missed nothing, her gaze moving between Lady Vesper and Captain Blackwood with obvious calculation. "Lady Vesper, my dear child," Lady Morrison called through her coach window. "I trust you will grace my gathering tomorrow evening. I have such interesting guests coming, including several visitors from the continent who have such fascinating stories to share." The emphasis on fascinating stories was deliberate. Lady Morrison was one of the few members of the ton who genuinely understood the power dynamics at play in their society. Her soirees were legendary not for their entertainment but for their strategic importance. Alliances were forged, reputations were made or destroyed, and information was traded like the precious commodity it was. "I would not miss it for the world," Lady Vesper replied, even as her mind began calculating the opportunities such an event would provide. Foreign visitors often brought new intelligence, and their unfamiliarity with London's social hierarchies made them wonderfully indiscreet. As Lady Morrison's coach rolled away, Captain Blackwood leaned closer to Lady Vesper's carriage. "It seems we shall meet again tomorrow evening. I find myself anticipating the encounter with unusual interest." "As do I, Captain," Lady Vesper replied, allowing just enough warmth into her voice to suggest possibilities while maintaining perfect propriety. "I suspect it will prove most educational." He touched his shako once more and spurred his horse away, leaving Lady Vesper to contemplate this unexpected development. In all her carefully planned machinations, she had not anticipated the arrival of someone who might understand her game well enough to play it himself. The thought was both thrilling and dangerous. As her carriage made its way back through the park, Lady Vesper reflected on the day's intelligence gathering. Lord Pemberton's reaction confirmed that her latest revelation had achieved its intended effect. Miss Weatherby's gossip suggested that the story was spreading with satisfying speed. Most intriguingly, Captain Blackwood's approach indicated that her activities had attracted the attention of someone with the skills to truly threaten her carefully constructed anonymity. The game had just become infinitely more interesting. Lady Morrison's mansion on Grosvenor Square blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their golden glow spilling from tall windows onto the fashionable crowds gathering for what promised to be the season's most significant soirée. The Palladian facade, with its perfectly proportioned columns and elegant pediment, provided a fitting backdrop for the elaborate theatre of high society about to unfold within its marble halls. Lady Vesper descended from her carriage with practiced grace, her evening ensemble a masterpiece of understated luxury. Her gown of midnight blue silk was cut in the latest Empire style, its high waist emphasizing her slender figure while its flowing skirts whispered secrets with every step. Sapphires that had once adorned the throat of a French queen caught the light at her neck and ears, their deep blue fire matching the mysterious depths of her eyes. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate chignon adorned with diamond pins that had been wedding gifts to her great-grandmother from the Duke of Marlborough himself. The Morrison mansion's interior was a testament to ducal taste and unlimited wealth. The entrance hall soared 3 stories above a floor of black and white marble squares arranged in complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the candlelight. Twin staircases curved upward like marble waterfalls, their brass railings polished to mirror brightness. Footmen in powder blue livery stood at attention, their faces as impassive as the classical statues that watched from alcoves along the walls. Lady Vesper moved through the receiving line with fluid efficiency, greeting Lady Morrison with the perfect combination of warmth and respect that their long acquaintance demanded. The Dowager Duchess was resplendent in purple velvet and the Morrison diamonds, a tiara that had been crafted for George III's coronation crowning her silver hair like a declaration of power. "My dear Vesper," Lady Morrison murmured as they exchanged the ritual kisses. "Such interesting company tonight. I do hope you will find opportunities for enlightening conversation." The emphasis was subtle but unmistakable. Lady Morrison's soirees were notorious for their carefully orchestrated encounters, where alliances were formed and secrets exchanged with the precision of diplomatic negotiations. Tonight's gathering would include not only the cream of London society but several continental visitors whose presence suggested plots within plots. Captain Blackwood appeared at Lady Vesper's elbow as if summoned by her thoughts. His evening dress was impeccable, black tailcoat and knee breeches that emphasized his military bearing, white waistcoat and cravat that provided stark contrast to his tanned complexion. The Waterloo medal on his breast caught the light as he bowed with perfect propriety. "Lady Vesper. You look magnificent tonight, though I confess I am more intrigued by what thoughts might be behind such a lovely facade." His words carried the double meaning that had characterized their previous encounter. Lady Vesper felt that familiar quickening of her pulse, the thrill of engaging with someone who understood the deeper currents flowing beneath society's polished surface. "How kind of you to say so, Captain. Though I fear my thoughts are quite ordinary, concerns about the weather, speculation about the evening's entertainment, curiosity about our fellow guests." "Curiosity," he repeated with a smile that suggested he understood exactly what kind of curiosity she meant. "Yes, I imagine you find our companions endlessly fascinating. So many stories, so many secrets hidden behind fashionable facades." They were interrupted by the arrival of Count Alessandro di Montefeltro, one of the continental visitors whose presence had been whispered about in drawing rooms throughout Mayfair. The Italian nobleman was perhaps 45, with the kind of world-weary elegance that spoke of diplomatic experience and carefully guarded secrets. His dark eyes held intelligence and something else, a recognition that made Lady Vesper's instincts sharpen. "Lady Vesper," the Count said in accented English as he was presented by Lady Morrison. "I have heard so much about you from our mutual friends in Vienna. Your reputation for discretion and insight precedes you." The words were perfectly proper, but their subtext sent warning signals through Lady Vesper's carefully calibrated senses. Vienna was the center of European intelligence networks, a city where information was currency and secrets were commodities. What had this man heard, and from whom? "You flatter me, Count," she replied with her most charming smile. "I fear I am quite unremarkable compared to the fascinating individuals one encounters in diplomatic circles." Captain Blackwood watched this exchange with obvious interest, his grey eyes moving between Lady Vesper and the Count like a chess player studying his opponent's positions. "Count di Montefeltro, I believe we have mutual acquaintances from the Congress of Vienna. Prince Metternich spoke highly of your contributions to information exchange." The captain's intervention was masterful, simultaneously establishing his own credentials while subtly probing the Count's purpose. Lady Vesper felt a grudging admiration for his tactical skills even as she wondered whether he was protecting her or investigating her. Count di Montefeltro's smile was urbane but his eyes remained watchful. "Ah yes, the Congress. Such fascinating times, when the fate of nations hung on whispered conversations and carefully placed revelations. One learned to appreciate the art of strategic disclosure." The phrase hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications. Lady Vesper realized that she had been correct to be cautious. This was no ordinary social encounter but a carefully orchestrated meeting with purposes that extended far beyond entertainment. The conversation was interrupted by the announcement of dinner, and the company began to move toward the dining room in order of precedence. Lady Vesper found herself escorted by Captain Blackwood, while Count di Montefeltro offered his arm to Lady Morrison herself, a placement that confirmed his importance in the evening's carefully choreographed drama. The Morrison dining room was a temple to aristocratic excess, its walls covered in silk damask the color of old gold. The massive table could seat 40 guests, its mahogany surface reflecting the light of crystal chandeliers that had illuminated the dinners of kings. Tonight it was set for 24, creating an intimate atmosphere where every word could be heard and every glance noted. Lady Vesper found herself seated between Captain Blackwood and Lord Hartwell, a placement that would normally have delighted her for its intelligence-gathering opportunities. Lord Hartwell was notorious for his loose tongue after wine, and Captain Blackwood's presence promised continued verbal sparring. However, the presence of Count di Montefeltro across the table added an element of danger that made her pulse race with more than social excitement. The first course was served with the ceremony befitting a ducal establishment, turtle soup in several porcelain bowls, accompanied by wines that had been laid down when Napoleon was still a Corsican lieutenant. Conversation flowed with the practiced ease of people accustomed to performing their social roles while conducting deeper business beneath the surface. "Such terrible business with Lord Pemberton," Lady Hartwell was saying to her neighbor. "They say the family may lose everything. Poor Miss Fairfax is quite beside herself." Lady Vesper maintained her expression of polite concern while internally savoring the success of her latest campaign. Lord Pemberton's financial ruin was progressing exactly as she had planned, each revelation building upon the last to create an unstoppable cascade of social destruction. "Anonymous letters are such cowardly things," Captain Blackwood observed quietly, his voice pitched to carry just to Lady Vesper's ears. "Though one must admire the skill required to gather such precise intelligence. It suggests someone with exceptional access to private information." "Or exceptional imagination," Lady Vesper replied with a slight smile. "Amazing how fertile minds can create scandal from the smallest seeds of truth." Count di Montefeltro's voice carried across the table with continental charm. "In my experience, anonymous correspondence usually serves one of two purposes, blackmail or manipulation. The author either seeks financial gain or social control." The observation was delivered with casual ease, but Lady Vesper caught the sharp glance that accompanied it. This man was testing her, probing for reactions that might confirm suspicions. She felt the familiar thrill of danger mixed with professional pride. To be hunted by someone of the Count's obvious capabilities was flattering even as it was threatening. "How cynical you are, Count," she replied with a tinkling laugh. "Perhaps some people simply enjoy creating mischief for its own sake. Not everyone requires such calculated motives." "Mischief," the Count repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose there is a certain artistic pleasure in watching one's carefully planned revelations create exactly the desired effect. Like composing a symphony of social destruction." The metaphor was both beautiful and chilling. Lady Vesper found herself genuinely impressed by the Count's understanding of her methods, even as she wondered how much he actually knew about her activities. The evening's entertainment had been carefully planned to provide opportunities for private conversation away from the formal constraints of the dining table. Lady Morrison had arranged for musical performances in the music room, card tables in the library, and intimate seating areas in the various drawing rooms where guests could pursue their individual interests and conversations. Lady Vesper found herself in the blue drawing room, ostensibly listening to Miss Pemberton perform a melancholy air on the pianoforte while actually observing the patterns of movement and conversation throughout the mansion. Captain Blackwood had positioned himself near the windows where he could watch both the room and the garden beyond, while Count di Montefeltro held court near the fireplace with several of the evening's most influential guests. The young Pemberton daughter's performance was technically proficient but emotionally raw, her distress over her family's circumstances evident in every note. Lady Vesper felt a moment's sympathy for the girl. She had never intended for innocent parties to suffer, though she had long ago accepted that collateral damage was inevitable in any effective campaign. "She plays beautifully," Captain Blackwood observed as he approached. "Though I suspect her heart is not entirely in the music tonight." "Difficult circumstances can either inspire great art or destroy it entirely," Lady Vesper replied. "Miss Pemberton appears to be of the more resilient variety. Unlike her father, who seems to be crumbling under the weight of his revelations." The word carried deliberate emphasis. Captain Blackwood was continuing their cat-and-mouse game, each exchange revealing a little more while maintaining perfect deniability. Lady Vesper found herself enjoying the verbal fencing as much as she feared its ultimate conclusion. "Perhaps Lord Pemberton simply lacks the constitution for adversity," she suggested. "Some people are not built for the rough weather that life occasionally provides, while others seem to thrive in storms of their own creation." The observation was delivered with a smile that removed any obvious sting, but its meaning was unmistakable. Captain Blackwood was no longer merely suspicious, he was certain. The question was what he intended to do with his knowledge. Their conversation was interrupted by Count di Montefeltro's approach, his diplomatic smile failing to conceal the predatory gleam in his dark eyes. "Lady Vesper, Captain Blackwood. I hope you will forgive the interruption, but I find myself in need of Lady Vesper's particular expertise." "I cannot imagine what expertise I might possess that would interest you, Count," Lady Vesper replied, though her pulse quickened with anticipation. "Information has always been my profession," the Count said smoothly. "And I have learned to recognize others who share my appreciation for its proper application. Perhaps we might speak privately." The request was politely phrased but carried the weight of command. Lady Vesper realized that the evening had been building toward this moment, that her careful game of anonymous manipulation had finally attracted the attention of forces larger and more dangerous than London society. Captain Blackwood stepped closer, his protective instincts clearly aroused. "Perhaps such a conversation might benefit from additional perspectives," he suggested with military directness. Count di Montefeltro's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "How kind of you to offer, Captain. Yes, I think your unique background might indeed prove valuable to our discussion." As they moved toward a more private corner of the room, Lady Vesper felt the familiar thrill of danger mixed with something new, the unsettling realization that she might no longer be the hunter but the hunted. The secluded alcove behind the blue drawing room's heavy velvet curtains created an intimate space where whispered conversations could unfold without fear of discovery. Count di Montefeltro gestured for Lady Vesper and Captain Blackwood to seat themselves on the silk-covered settee while he remained standing, a position that gave him both psychological advantage and quick access to the room's exits. "I must begin with a confession," the Count said, his continental accent lending gravity to his words. "My presence in London is not entirely social in nature. I represent certain interests that have become concerned about the activities of your mysterious correspondent." Lady Vesper maintained her expression of polite curiosity despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "I confess I fail to understand why foreign interests would concern themselves with London gossip, however entertaining it might be." The Count's smile was razor-sharp. "Because, my dear Lady Vesper, this gossip has begun to affect matters of international significance. Lord Pemberton, for instance, sits on the Foreign Office Committee responsible for Mediterranean trade routes. His financial disgrace will necessitate his resignation, creating opportunities for French influence that certain parties would prefer to avoid. Captain Blackwood leaned forward slightly, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. You speak as if these anonymous revelations are part of some larger strategy rather than random mischief. Indeed I do, the Count replied. The pattern is too precise, the timing too convenient, the targets too carefully selected to be anything but deliberate policy. Someone has been using social destruction as a tool of political manipulation. The accusation hung in the perfumed air like smoke from a discharged pistol. Lady Vesper felt the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to shift and realign. She had always thought of her activities as personal amusement, a game of power and control played within the confines of London society. The suggestion that her actions had attracted international attention was both thrilling and terrifying. Surely you overestimate the importance of society scandals, she said carefully. The Tun's preoccupations rarely extend beyond ballrooms and drawing rooms. Count de Montefeltro produced a leather portfolio from his evening coat, extracting several documents with practiced efficiency. 3 months ago, the Earl of Westmoreland received an anonymous letter detailing his son's debts to French gambling houses. Within a week, he had withdrawn his support for the trade embargo that was strangling Bonaparte's remaining sympathizers in Corsica. He placed the first document on the small table between them, its official seals and foreign script confirming its authenticity. 6 weeks ago, Lord Halifax's affair with the wife of a Spanish diplomat was exposed through similar means. His subsequent resignation from the Iberian Committee opened the position to Lord Castlereagh's nephew, whose sympathies lie with the restored Bourbon monarchy. A second document joined the first, its Spanish text accompanied by what appeared to be correspondence between British and continental intelligence services. Lady Vesper's mind raced to process the implications of what she was seeing. Her careful campaigns of social destruction had inadvertently served larger purposes, creating political opportunities that she had never intended. Most recently, the Count continued, placing a third document before them. The Duke of Marlborough's heir has been forced to curtail his European travels due to revelations about his gambling habits. This has prevented him from attending the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle, where his presence would have complicated certain delicate negotiations. Captain Blackwood studied the documents with professional interest. You suggest that someone has been using social scandal as a tool of statecraft. But surely such precision would require not only extensive intelligence gathering but careful coordination with continental interests. Precisely, the Count agreed. Which is why my superiors have concluded that we are dealing with either a foreign agent of exceptional skill or a domestic operator who has been unconsciously serving foreign interests. In either case, the situation requires adjustment. The word adjustment carried ominous undertones that made Lady Vesper's blood run cold. She had always prided herself on her ability to navigate dangerous waters, but this conversation suggested depths she had never suspected. Her anonymous letters had apparently become pawns in a game whose scope and stakes dwarfed anything she had imagined. What sort of adjustment do you propose? Captain Blackwood asked, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of a professional soldier assessing a threat. Count de Montefeltro's smile was diplomatic but implacable. That depends largely on the identity and cooperation of our mysterious correspondent. Someone with such evident skill and access could prove invaluable as a willing ally. Alternatively, they might find their activities curtailed through methods both less pleasant and less subtle than polite conversation. The threat was delivered with elegant courtesy, but its implications were unmistakable. Lady Vesper realized that her carefully constructed anonymity had become both her greatest asset and her most dangerous liability. To maintain her secret might mean facing enemies with resources that dwarfed anything available to her. To reveal herself might mean becoming a tool in games she had never chosen to play. You seem remarkably confident in your ability to identify this person, she observed, testing the waters of the Count's knowledge. "Oh, but I already have," he replied with obvious satisfaction. "The intelligence services of 3 nations have been investigating these mysterious letters for months. The pattern of information revealed, the social circles with access to such secrets, the precise timing of each revelation, all point to a single source." Lady Vesper felt the trap closing around her with inexorable precision. Years of careful planning and meticulous execution had apparently left traces that trained professionals could follow back to their source. The very skills that had made her London's most feared woman had also made her visible to enemies she had never suspected existed. Captain Blackwood shifted slightly, a movement so subtle that only someone with Lady Vesper's trained observation would have noticed. His hand had moved closer to the inner pocket of his evening coat where she suspected he carried a pistol, standard equipment for officers who had served in active campaigns. The gesture suggested that he was prepared to defend her, though against what specific threat remained unclear. "Your investigation must have been remarkably thorough," the captain observed. "Though I confess curiosity about your certainty. Intelligence work rarely provides such definitive conclusions." The Count's laugh was genuinely amused. "True, Captain. But in this case, we had advantages that typical investigations lack. You see, we have been monitoring certain individuals for some time, people whose activities and associations make them natural subjects of interest." He withdrew a final document from his portfolio, this one bearing the unmistakable crest of the British Foreign Office. "Lady Vesper Ashworth has been under discreet observation for the past year, ever since her inheritance included certain materials from her grandfather's wartime activities. A man who served his country's intelligence services often leaves behind resources that prove interesting to subsequent generations." The revelation struck Lady Vesper like a physical blow. Her grandfather's papers, which she had thought were merely family archives, had apparently contained materials significant enough to warrant official attention. Her activities had been noticed not because of any mistake on her part but because she had inherited more than just the Ashworth fortune and methodology. The watchers became concerned, the Count continued, when Lady Vesper's social activities began producing political consequences that aligned suspiciously well with foreign interests. The question arose whether she was acting independently or under direction. Captain Blackwood's voice carried a dangerous edge when he spoke. "And what conclusion did your investigation reach?" "That Lady Vesper is guilty of nothing more than exceptional intelligence applied to domestic entertainment," the Count replied. "Her anonymous letters appear to be motivated by personal amusement rather than political conspiracy. However, their effects have been so beneficial to certain continental interests that continued tolerance would be imprudent." The sentence felt like a death warrant delivered with diplomatic courtesy. Lady Vesper understood that she stood at a crossroads where her choices were limited to cooperation or elimination. The game she had played for her own pleasure had apparently served purposes she had never intended, making her either a valuable asset or a dangerous liability. "What specifically do you require?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her thoughts. Count de Montefeltro's smile was triumphant. "Future coordination. Your remarkable skills, directed toward targets that serve broader interests rather than personal whim. In exchange, your identity remains protected and your activities receive official encouragement. And if I decline this generous offer? Then I fear our mysterious correspondence career would come to an abrupt and permanent conclusion. Anonymous letters are difficult to compose from a continental prison, or from beyond the grave." The alternatives were stated with such calm politeness that their brutality became even more shocking. Lady Vesper had always known that her activities carried risks, but she had never imagined consequences that extended beyond social ostracism or financial ruin. Captain Blackwood rose with fluid grace, his movement carrying the controlled tension of a predator preparing to strike. "Count, I believe you have made your position admirably clear. Now allow me to clarify mine." His voice carried the authority of command and the promise of violence. "Lady Vesper is under the protection of His Majesty's government. Any threats against her person or liberty will be considered acts of war against the crown itself. The claim was made with such conviction that Lady Vesper almost believed it herself. Whether Captain Blackwood was bluffing or revealing previously hidden authority, his intervention had fundamentally altered the dynamic of their confrontation. Count de Montefeltro's composure showed the first cracks of uncertainty. "Captain, I think perhaps you misunderstand the delicate nature of international relations. Certain accommodations must be made to preserve the greater peace." "I understand perfectly," Captain Blackwood replied. "And I suggest you understand that England protects its own, regardless of the inconvenience to foreign interests." The two men faced each other across the small space like opposing generals preparing for battle. Lady Vesper realized that she had become not just the subject of their dispute but the prize for which they were prepared to fight. The anonymous correspondent who had once controlled London's secrets had become a secret herself, coveted by forces whose power dwarfed anything she had previously imagined. The sound of approaching footsteps and voices from the main drawing room reminded them all that their confrontation was taking place in the midst of Lady Morrison's soirée, where discovery could prove catastrophic for all involved. Count de Montefeltro smoothly gathered his documents while Captain Blackwood stepped closer to Lady Vesper in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "This conversation is far from concluded," the Count said with diplomatic courtesy that failed to disguise the steel beneath. "Lady Vesper, I trust you will consider my proposal carefully. Captain, I hope you will reflect on the broader implications of your position." As he moved to rejoin the social gathering, Lady Vesper found herself alone with Captain Blackwood in the artificial intimacy of their velvet-curtained alcove. The man who had begun the evening as a fascinating opponent had revealed himself as something far more complex, a protector whose own secrets might prove as dangerous as the enemies from whom he shielded her. "I think," she said quietly, "that this evening has become far more interesting than either of us anticipated." His grey eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Lady Vesper, I believe we need to discuss more than just the Count's proposals. There are matters regarding your future that require immediate attention." The words carried implications that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. Lady Vesper realized that her carefully controlled world was about to undergo changes that would test not only her considerable skills but her capacity for trust in a man whose own mysteries might prove as deep as her own. The Ashworth mansion stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its familiar silhouettes transformed into something ominous by the weight of secrets and threats that had followed Lady Vesper home from Lady Morrison's soirée. She moved through her private study like a phantom, her silk wrapper whispering against priceless Persian carpets as she contemplated the chessboard that her life had suddenly become. Captain Blackwood sat across from her in the leather chair that had once belonged to her grandfather, his evening clothes replaced by the practical attire of a man prepared for action. His scarlet military coat lay draped over a nearby table, revealing a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the controlled power of his movements. In the firelight, the scar across his cheek seemed deeper, a reminder that this man had faced death before and emerged victorious. "The Count was correct about one thing," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority she had come to recognize as his natural tone. "Your grandfather's papers did contain materials of interest to the government. What he failed to mention is that I was sent here specifically to secure them." Lady Vesper felt the familiar thrill of revelation mixed with the sting of betrayal. "So our encounters have been as carefully orchestrated as everything else in my recent life. How disappointing to discover that even you are playing a deeper game." Captain Blackwood's grey eyes met hers without flinching. The assignment was to secure the papers and assess any potential security risks posed by their inheritance. What I did not anticipate was finding myself emotionally compromised by the subject of my investigation. The admission hung between them like a bridge across dangerous waters. Lady Vesper studied his face for signs of deception and found only the kind of raw honesty that her world rarely afforded. In a society built on masks and performances, such directness was both refreshing and terrifying. "Emotionally compromised," she repeated thoughtfully. "How remarkably clinical you make it sound." Are you saying that duty conflicts with inclination, Captain? I am saying that Lady Vesper Ashworth the mysterious correspondent is one thing, while Lady Vesper Ashworth the woman is quite another. The first is a security concern requiring management. The second is... He paused, seeming to search for words adequate to his meaning. The second is someone I find myself wanting to protect regardless of orders or consequences. The confession was delivered with military directness, but Lady Vesper could hear the emotional cost beneath his controlled exterior. Here was a man accustomed to clear objectives and straightforward solutions, struggling with complexities that had no easy resolution. Protection, she mused, rising to move toward the window where dawn was beginning to paint the London sky in shades of pearl and gold. Such an interesting concept. Are you protecting me from Count de Montefeltro, from my own activities, or from the consequences of your government's interest in my affairs? Captain Blackwood rose as well, his movement bringing him closer to where she stood silhouetted against the growing light. All of those, and perhaps from myself as well. My orders were to neutralize any threat you might pose to British interests. Instead, I find myself wanting to eliminate any threat that others might pose to you. The reversal was beautifully articulated, transforming him from potential enemy to declared ally. Lady Vesper felt her carefully maintained emotional distance wavering under the assault of his sincerity. She had spent so many years manipulating others' feelings that experiencing genuine emotion directed toward herself felt almost foreign. Your superiors might consider such a transformation problematic, she observed, though her voice carried warmth that had been absent during their previous confrontations. My superiors, Captain Blackwood replied with a slight smile, are about to discover that their operative has developed complications that extend far beyond the scope of his original mission. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the subtle sense of his cologne mixed with the more masculine essence of leather and steel that seemed to emanate from his very presence. In the growing daylight, she could see the way his dark hair caught glints of silver, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of campaigns fought in distant lands, the way his mouth curved when he looked at her as if she were the answer to questions he had not known he was asking. Complications, Lady Vesper murmured, turning to face him fully. I have built my entire existence around avoiding such things. Emotions compromise judgment, attachments create vulnerabilities, trust becomes a weapon that others can use against you. And yet, Captain Blackwood said, his hand rising to touch her cheek with surprising gentleness, you trusted me enough to allow this conversation to continue when you could have fled or called for help or simply denied everything. The touch was electric, sending currents of sensation through her carefully controlled facade. Lady Vesper realized that somewhere between their first encounter in Hyde Park and this moment of dawn revelation, she had indeed begun to trust this complicated man whose arrival had shattered her world's carefully maintained order. Perhaps, she said, leaning slightly into his touch, I am discovering that some complications are worth the risk they create. The admission was perhaps the most honest thing she had said in years. Captain Blackwood's eyes darkened with something that had nothing to do with the military planning that usually occupied his thoughts. When he kissed her, it was with the controlled passion of a man who had learned to take what moments of beauty life offered while they lasted. Lady Vesper found herself responding with an abandon that surprised her. For so long she had been the orchestrator of others' emotions, the puppeteer pulling strings to create the dramatic scenes she desired. To be the subject rather than the object of such intensity was both liberating and overwhelming. When they separated, both were breathing as if they had been running. The study around them seemed transformed by what had passed between them, its familiar furnishings now witnesses to a shift in Lady Vesper's carefully constructed reality. This changes everything, she said, though whether in warning or wonder was unclear. Yes, Captain Blackwood agreed. Which brings us to the question of what we do next. Count de Montefeltro will not simply disappear because we have discovered our feelings for each other. Your anonymous letters have created a situation that extends far beyond London society, and pretending otherwise will not make the danger less real. The return to practical matters was necessary but jarring. Lady Vesper felt herself shifting back into the calculating persona that had served her so well, even as part of her mourned the loss of the vulnerable woman who had emerged so briefly. "The Count offered cooperation in exchange for direction of my activities," she said, her voice regaining its customary control. "Your government apparently wants those same activities curtailed for security reasons. Neither option seems particularly appealing." Captain Blackwood moved to the window, his military bearing reasserting itself as he considered their tactical position. "There is a third option, though it would require considerable courage and perfect execution." "I am listening." "We give them what they want while ensuring that you retain control over the game. Your anonymous correspondent reveals herself as Lady Vesper Ashworth, but only under circumstances that guarantee your safety and continued independence." The proposal was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. To abandon the anonymity that had been her greatest protection would require trust on a scale that Lady Vesper had never contemplated. "You suggest that I reveal myself voluntarily rather than wait to be exposed," she said slowly. "But surely that would make me even more vulnerable to pressure from all sides." "Not if the revelation comes with appropriate guarantees," Captain Blackwood replied. "I have authority to offer you official protection as a valued intelligence asset. Your skills would be retained for Crown service, but with compensation and security that your current situation cannot provide." The offer was generous, but Lady Vesper understood the chains that would come with such golden handcuffs. "Government service," she mused. "Anonymous letters directed by Crown policy rather than personal whim. It has a certain appeal, though I confess concern about the loss of creative freedom." "Creative freedom that has apparently been serving foreign interests whether you intended it or not," Captain Blackwood pointed out. "At least official direction would ensure that your considerable talents serve British purposes." The logic was impeccable, but Lady Vesper found herself reluctant to abandon the independence that had defined her adult life. She had been the mysterious correspondent for barely a year, but already the power and control had become addictive. To trade that for government service, however well compensated, felt like a form of surrender. "And if I decline your generous offer?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Then I fear you will find yourself caught between Count de Montefeltro's demands and my superior's concerns, with very few options for maintaining either your anonymity or your freedom." The assessment was delivered with regret but no attempt at softening its harsh reality. Lady Vesper understood that her game had reached a point where continuing to play by her own rules was no longer possible. The question was whether she could accept new rules that preserved at least some measure of the excitement and control she craved. "Your proposal assumes that I trust you sufficiently to place my life and future in your hands," she observed. "That represents a considerable leap of faith for someone whose survival has depended on trusting no one completely." Captain Blackwood turned from the window to face her, his expression serious but determined. "It does. Just as my willingness to defy orders in order to protect you represents a considerable risk to my own career and possibly my life. We are both contemplating choices that require trust on an unprecedented scale." The symmetry was beautiful and terrible. Lady Vesper realized that they had reached a moment where half measures and careful calculations would no longer suffice. Either they would commit fully to whatever alliance was forming between them, or they would part forever with the knowledge that they had missed something rare and precious. "I need to know," she said finally, "that if I agree to your proposal, you will be more than just my handler or protector. I need to know that what has begun between us will survive the transformation you are suggesting." Captain Blackwood crossed the room in 3 swift strides, taking her hands in his with a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. "Lady Vesper, what has begun between us exists independently of any government service or official arrangements. My feelings for you have nothing to do with your value as an intelligence asset and everything to do with your value as a woman worth loving." The declaration was everything she had not known she needed to hear. For the first time in her adult life, Lady Vesper found herself willing to contemplate a future that included genuine partnership rather than solitary control. "Then I believe," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to, that we should begin planning how to transform the mysterious correspondent into an official asset while ensuring that Lady Vesper Ashworth retains enough independence to remain interesting. Captain Blackwood's smile was brilliant with relief and anticipation. In that case, my dear, we have a great deal of work to do and very little time in which to do it. Count de Montefeltro will not wait indefinitely for an answer, and my superiors are expecting a report within the week. As they began to plan their strategy for navigating the treacherous waters ahead, Lady Vesper felt the familiar thrill of embarking on a complex campaign. The difference was that for the first time, she would not be playing alone. The grand ballroom of Ashworth House had been transformed into a theatre worthy of the season's most significant revelation. Crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across walls hung with Ashworth family portraits, their painted eyes seeming to watch with approval as their descendant prepared to orchestrate her greatest performance. 200 members of London's most elite society filled the space with the rustle of silk, the glitter of jewels, and the electric anticipation that preceded moments of historical significance. Lady Vesper stood at the top of the marble staircase that swept down into the ballroom, her gown a masterpiece that seemed to capture starlight in its folds. The dress, created by Madame Bertin herself, was crafted from silver tissue silk that shifted between platinum and pearl with every movement. Diamonds that had adorned the throats of queens caught the light at her neck, while her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure crowned with the Ashworth tiara, a piece that had not been worn in public for 20 years. Captain Blackwood waited at the foot of the stairs, magnificent in his dress uniform. The scarlet and gold of the 1st Dragoon Guards had never looked more splendid, his medals catching the light as he moved. But it was the expression in his grey eyes as he watched her descent that took her breath away, a mixture of admiration, protection, and something deeper that made her pulse race despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The past week had been a whirlwind of careful planning and delicate negotiations. Captain Blackwood's superiors had agreed to the arrangement with surprising alacrity once they understood the full scope of Lady Vesper's capabilities and the international implications of her activities. Count de Montefeltro had been informed that his concerns would be addressed through proper diplomatic channels, effectively removing him from the immediate equation while maintaining the illusion of continental cooperation. Tonight would see the controlled revelation of Lady Vesper's identity as the mysterious correspondent, but under circumstances that guaranteed her safety and established her new role as a government asset. The cream of London society would witness what they believed was a shocking confession, never suspecting that every word had been carefully choreographed to serve purposes far beyond their comprehension. Lady Morrison stood near the orchestra, her purple velvet gown and ducal diamonds marking her as one of the evening's most important witnesses. She had been briefed on her role as unwitting collaborator, believing that she was simply hosting another of her legendary soirees when in fact she was participating in a complex intelligence operation. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as the guests arranged themselves according to the subtle cues that would ensure optimal positioning for what was to come. Lord Pemberton was present, looking haggard but defiant in the face of his recent scandals. His attendance had been specifically requested, ostensibly as an act of social rehabilitation but actually to serve as a living example of the mysterious correspondent's power. Miss Fairfax stood beside him, her pale blue gown and nervous manner making her the perfect picture of innocent suffering, a reminder to all present of the human cost of social warfare. The orchestra began the opening strains of a waltz, and couples took their positions on the polished floor. Lady Vesper descended the final steps to join Captain Blackwood, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with the music and everything to do with the magnitude of what they were attempting. As they began to dance, she was acutely aware that this might be the last time she could move through society as the mysterious Lady Vesper Ashworth rather than the known government agent she was about to become. "Are you prepared for this?" Captain Blackwood murmured as they turned in perfect synchronization, his voice pitched so low that only she could hear. "I have been preparing for this moment all my life," she replied, though whether she meant the revelation or the dance or something else entirely was unclear even to herself. The waltz continued for several measures, allowing the assembled company to observe and speculate about the elegant couple at its center. Lady Vesper was aware of every watching eye, every whispered comment, every subtle gesture that revealed the undercurrents of gossip and speculation that always swirled beneath the surface of such gatherings. Soon those same eyes would witness her transformation from mysterious figure to known quantity, and she wondered if the power she had wielded in shadow could survive exposure to such brilliant light. As the music reached its crescendo, Captain Blackwood guided her toward the center of the ballroom where a small raised platform had been arranged for the evening's entertainment. Lady Morrison had announced that Lady Vesper would be reading selections from recent poetry, a perfectly ordinary activity that would provide the setting for an extraordinary revelation. Lady Vesper took her position on the platform with the fluid grace that had always marked her movements, but now every gesture carried additional weight. The assembled company quieted in anticipation of her performance, fans snapping shut and conversations trailing off as attention focused on the elegant figure who had commanded their respect and speculation for so many years. "My lords and ladies," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Tonight I have chosen to share with you not the works of established poets, but rather some anonymous correspondence that has been circulating in our society with such remarkable effect." The first murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as she produced a familiar piece of cream vellum from her reticule. Several guests exchanged meaningful glances, recognizing the paper that had become synonymous with scandal and revelation throughout Mayfair. "These letters," Lady Vesper continued, her voice remaining perfectly controlled despite the magnitude of what she was revealing, "have been credited with extraordinary insight into our private affairs. Their anonymous author has been the subject of considerable speculation and, I confess, some admiration for their evident skill in gathering and deploying intelligence." Lord Pemberton's face had gone pale, while several other guests who had been subjects of anonymous revelations shifted uncomfortably in their positions. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone present realized that they were about to witness either the exposure or the confession of London's most mysterious figure. "I stand before you tonight," Lady Vesper said, her voice growing stronger as she approached the climactic moment, "to acknowledge that I am the author of these letters. I am your anonymous correspondent." The silence that followed was absolute, as if the entire ballroom had been frozen in crystal. Then the whispers began, building from scattered murmurs to a crescendo of shocked conversation that threatened to overwhelm the space entirely. Lady Vesper stood perfectly still in the center of the storm she had created, waiting for the initial shock to subside before continuing her carefully prepared revelation. Captain Blackwood moved closer to the platform, his presence a reminder that she was not alone in facing the consequences of her confession. His hand rested casually on his sword hilt, a gesture that appeared merely formal but carried clear warning to anyone who might consider her newly revealed vulnerability an opportunity for revenge. "I understand," Lady Vesper continued once the noise had diminished enough for her voice to carry, "that this revelation may shock and perhaps disappoint some of you. My activities have been conducted in secret for reasons that I hope will become clear." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembled faces, some shocked, some calculating, some angry, and others displaying the bright curiosity of those who had suspected the truth and were delighted to have their theories confirmed. "The information contained in my letters has served purposes beyond mere social entertainment," she said, her voice taking on the authority that had always marked her private manner but was now being displayed publicly for the first time. "I have been honored to serve His Majesty's government in gathering intelligence that affects not only our society but our nation's security." This second revelation created an even greater sensation than the first. The idea that their mysterious correspondent had been operating as a government agent transformed the entire context of her activities. What had seemed like malicious gossip was suddenly revealed as patriotic service, and the moral calculations of her audience shifted accordingly. Count di Montefeltro, who had been watching from near the back of the ballroom, began moving toward the exits with the smooth efficiency of a man who recognized when retreat was the better part of valor. His continental interests had just been publicly neutered by Lady Vesper's official acknowledgement of her government connections. "I do not expect forgiveness from those who have suffered as a result of my revelations," Lady Vesper continued, her eyes finding Lord Pemberton in the crowd. But I hope you will understand that personal sacrifice has always been the price of national service. The apology was gracefully delivered and perfectly pitched to appeal to the aristocratic values of duty and honor that defined her audience. Lord Pemberton, to his credit, inclined his head in grudging acknowledgement of her explanation, even as his face remained tight with the pain of his public humiliation. Lady Morrison stepped forward, her ducal authority giving weight to her words. Lady Vesper, your service to crown and country honors not only the Ashworth name but our entire society. Those who have served with distinction in the shadows deserve our gratitude rather than our censure. The endorsement from such an influential figure began the process of social rehabilitation that Lady Vesper would need to survive her transformation from mysterious figure to public servant. Other voices began to add their support, the tide of opinion shifting as her audience processed the implications of her revelation. Captain Blackwood mounted the platform to stand beside her, his presence lending official weight to her claims while also making a personal statement that was not lost on the assembled company. Lady Vesper's contributions to our nation's security have been invaluable, he said, his military authority adding credibility to her story. Her willingness to serve at personal cost reflects the finest traditions of British service. The captain's endorsement carried special weight not only because of his military credentials but because of the obvious personal connection between them that had been the subject of much speculation throughout the evening. Their partnership was being publicly acknowledged as both professional and personal, creating a romantic subplot that would help sustain interest in their story long after the initial shock of revelation had faded. As the evening progressed, Lady Vesper found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious questioners, all eager to demonstrate their support for her newly revealed patriotic activities. The transformation was remarkable. The woman who had been feared as a destroyer of reputations was now celebrated as a defender of national interests. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Miss Fairfax approached, her young face showing the strain of recent events but also a surprising maturity. Lady Vesper, she said quietly, I cannot pretend that your revelations about Lord Pemberton did not cause me great pain. But I have come to understand that sometimes personal happiness must be sacrificed for larger purposes. The forgiveness was offered with grace that spoke well of the young woman's character and provided Lady Vesper with absolution from perhaps the most innocent victim of her campaigns. Thank you, Miss Fairfax, she replied with genuine emotion. Your understanding means more to me than you can know. As the evening drew toward its close, Lady Vesper and Captain Blackwood found themselves alone on the terrace overlooking the Ashworth Gardens. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, but the warmth between them needed no external source. So it is done, she said, leaning against the stone balustrade as she contemplated the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Lady Vesper Ashworth, mysterious correspondent, is dead. In her place stands Lady Vesper Ashworth, government agent and, what else? Captain Blackwood moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers in casual intimacy. And beloved wife of Captain Harrison Blackwood, if she will have him. The proposal was delivered with the same directness that had characterized all his communications, but Lady Vesper could hear the uncertainty beneath his confident exterior. For all his military bearing and professional competence, he was still a man asking a woman to share his life, with all the vulnerability such requests entailed. Captain, she said, turning to face him fully, are you proposing to a government agent or to the woman who has just destroyed her own mystery for the sake of love? I am proposing to the woman who has proven that she values truth above power, love above control, and partnership above solitary dominance. The woman who chose trust over suspicion and revealed herself rather than remain hidden. His words captured exactly what her transformation had meant, not just a change in professional status but a fundamental shift in how she approached the world and the people in it. Lady Vesper realized that in choosing to reveal herself, she had also chosen to become someone worthy of the love he was offering. Then yes, she said, her voice carrying both joy and determination. Yes, I will marry you, and yes, I will serve His Majesty's government, and yes, I will find ways to remain sufficiently mysterious to keep life interesting. Their kiss was witnessed by the stars above and the sleeping city below, sealing not just their personal commitment but their professional partnership in the complex games that would define their future together. Lady Vesper Ashworth had begun the evening as London's most feared social predator and ended it as Britain's newest intelligence asset in Captain Blackwood's betrothed. The mysterious correspondent might have been revealed, but Lady Vesper herself remained wonderfully, dangerously, beautifully enigmatic, exactly as any proper spy's wife should be. In the months that followed, London society would adapt to Lady Vesper's new status with the remarkable resilience that had always characterized the Ton. Her anonymous letters ceased, but her intelligence gathering continued under official auspices, serving Crown interests while maintaining the social connections that made her so valuable. Her marriage to Captain Blackwood became one of the season's most celebrated events, uniting military valor with aristocratic grace in a partnership that promised to reshape the very nature of British intelligence operations. And sometimes, late at night in the Ashworth mansion that had become the Blackwood residence, Lady Vesper would sit at her mahogany escritoire and compose letters, not anonymous revelations but personal correspondence to the friends and allies who had emerged from the wreckage of her former life. The cream vellum remained the same, but now it carried messages of hope and partnership rather than destruction and control. The mysterious correspondent had found something more valuable than secrets. She had found love, purpose, and a future that promised adventures beyond anything her solitary imagination had ever conceived.